Hello, my name's Akeisha and I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Development Lead. This episode of the Creative Community Podcast is part of the Your Voice, Your Story series for Black History Month, where we're interviewing Black staff members and people we support to learn more about their culture, heritage, traditions and lives. In this episode, we have Mawda, a training administrator at Creative Support. She discusses her Libyan heritage and some of the traditions, values and norms she's grown up with. We hope you enjoy.
So let's get straight into
Do
it.
you want to start by telling me a little bit about you and your heritage?
Yeah, so my name is Mawda. My parents immigrated to the UK from Libya, which is it's actually the fifth biggest country in Africa by landmass. It's North African country. It's in the middle of Egypt and Algeria, which are two much more well-known ones. Libya is a bit forgotten. But yeah, it doesn't have a very big population. I think it's only about 6 million people. I think that includes people that live internationally as well. And so they moved during the dictatorship. So there's dictatorship from basically 2011 all the way back. It was 42 years. So wow. It would have been 69 that I started, I think. And that was a bit of a rough time. And my parents tell me a lot about that. Yeah. And then before then, Libya was an Italian colony until 1951. And then in between that and the dictatorship starting, it was a joint French and British rule. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting country. I think it's very ethnically diverse. But in terms of my heritage, so in the UK, I look quite mixed race. I get read as being like mixed heritage quite a lot. I've got curly hair. I've got like a sort of a medium sand skin tone. Like that nice medium beige, that like mid-range of the foundation shades. So growing up, a lot of people thought I was mixed race. But Libya as a country, it's got a huge diversity in how people look. There's people that are just, like sub-Saharan African. You would just say that they're black. There are people that are quite light, with more like prominent Italian heritage. And then there's just everything in the middle. I think just miscellaneously brown. Just everyone's a bit brown. And so, yeah. Growing up as well, it was just my parents and my siblings. I've got quite a big family. Okay. We didn't really have any extended family growing up in the UK. And so it was very much like, all the things that you absorb from your surroundings. It was very much from my parents or from the people that I knew at school. I went to a predominantly Southeast Asian school, and the people that weren't Southeast Asian were like Black, Arab, like Polish. There's like not really many like English people. So I grew up in quite like an immigrant heavy like area. I think that was really nice. But there weren't too many people that would look like me, or if they did look like me, they weren't my background. Like they weren't sort of like a mono thing. They weren't like one thing. And so yeah, I think definitely growing up, I think it is my mum predominantly, because my dad didn't really care. Well, not care, but I feel like he never really thought about it in his life. And then after moving, he also didn't really think about it that much. I feel like when you become an immigrant and then English is not your first language, that's the thing that you focus on. You're not really bothered about how you look that much. But my dad had like significantly like, you would say like black features. My mum was a lot more like Roman looking. And definitely from when I was younger, she would always talk about Brigitte Bardot was so beautiful. She's the most beautiful woman in the world. She was what was on TV when my mum was younger. And definitely the sort of things that she had in mind for like being beautiful were like being very slender, being pale. You want like long, black, straight hair. You want like big coloured eyes, things like that. But definitely over the last, I would say like 10 to 15 years, she's definitely changed. I think with the discoverance of what fake tan is, do you know what I mean? She's a new woman. She's like, oh my God, people want to be darker. Like people want a tan. She's like so like the novelty of fake tan is the best for her.
So out of interest, did your parents grow up in Libya and move to the UK, or were they born in Libya and moved when they were young too?
No, they were both like adults when they moved. So my dad was in his early 30s. My dad moved to the UK. He'd done his master's and he was doing his PhD. So they moved to the UK. He went to Salford Uni. So my dad was in his early 30s. Mum was like in her like mid 20s. There's like a few years between them, yeah. And they already had like 3 kids. So they were like moving like as like a family unit, which I think is also why we like didn't really have anybody around us growing up, extended family wise. But yeah, so they already had things like in their heads. They've been exposed. They've been like, you know, all of that unconscious bias. It was in there, you know.
So your mum had internalised this Western beauty standards, even though she'd grown up in Libya.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and especially like for the time, you know, people like my parents grew up speaking Italian. Like lots of people knew Italian. It was like a common thing to know. There was lots of people that settled in Italy, you know, similar to places in America, with like, you know, like the South with like French migrants settling in the 1800s, things like that. So it became like a bit of more of an integrated like faction of the culture. And then with that as well, it was also like the expectation of like, oh, this is the best thing. Like this is the most beautiful thing. Like you kind of want to be like European in that way. I think it also represented like a lot of like just like economic stability. You know, if you were like a European, you were rich, or like you could afford to like do this, and that. And like there's a lot of like natural resources that were depleted during the colonial era. So yeah, I think it's definitely a lot of things that it represents.
Okay. So how was it for you growing up in the UK as you mentioned, a child who looks mixed race but has this history and this heritage that's so diverse and so mixed? How was your experience of growing up in the UK?
When I was younger, so my mum is religious, like she's Muslim. My dad wasn't religious, but you know it's very ingrained in the culture. Like it's one of those countries that is like a religious country, or like they have like a predominant religion that is like ingrained into the culture. And so there was a period of time when I was a kid where I wore a headscarf, and then I grew up a little bit. And I was like, actually, I'm not about this. I don't want to wear this. And then, you know, I ended up taking it off. But there was a couple of years where I wore a headscarf, and I think definitely for like I look the same. You know, but throughout my whole life I've looked the same. I've always had the same hair, like same skin tone, and everything like that. And so there was definitely a period of time where people just saw the headscarf, and they were like, okay, you are a Muslim. Whatever that might mean, like in terms of race, it was written off, and you were like, you are a Muslim, right? And then once I took the headscarf off, it was very much like, oh, okay, this is your race. Like it became like a, you know, like a characteristic. Whereas before it was just like, oh, you're a Muslim, or like you're an Arab, or something like that, which is like a bit of like an umbrella term. Yeah. So I feel like I only started like interacting with my race or thinking about it as a part of who I was probably when I was like 12. Which is like quite late, yeah. And I like grew up, you know, we speak Arabic at home. I learned how to read and write Arabic, and my mum was like an Arabic language teacher, and you know, we grew up like eating Libyan food, like everything like that. We're very like in tune with our culture, but it was definitely a bit of a whiplash from going to not to be seen as like a Muslim or somebody with a headscarf on, to then being like, oh, are you mixed race? Are you this? Are you that? Where are you from? Like, oh, your hair looks like this. Your skin tone is this. So I think that was a bit of a whiplash for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you mentioned that you grew up eating Libyan food and were very, very connected, and you expressed your culture a lot at home. Definitely. Can you tell us a little bit about your culture and some of your traditions and foods?
Definitely. There are some foods that I think people will know. So couscous was invented in North Africa. It's like a native dish.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you don't find it in any other Arab country. It's predominantly just the North African countries, which is Morocco, Algeria, Libya, and Egypt. Hummus is a big thing. I feel like lots of people love hummus, and falafels and things like that. There's a lot of tagine, like, you know, the sort of the clay pots people cook things in. Yeah. There's a lot of like lamb. We eat a lot of lamb, especially like on special occasions. Like lamb is the go-to meat. Yeah. But then also, so my mum would cook in the week. So we'd have like Libyan food every day. And then on the weekends, when my dad had time, he would cook. But he would cook Italian food. He'd cook pasta. He'd cook like, you know, like different like tray bakes, things like that. So it was quite funny. Like I'd like come in from playing on a Saturday, and they'd be like, cannelloni. They'd be like pasta. And I was like, okay, this is a bit of me. Like I really, really liked eating that kind of Italian food. And there's a lot of like dishes that are like very mixed. So there's like this like pasta dish, and instead of boiling the pasta, it's like fresh pasta. Instead of boiling it in water, you boil it in a tomato meat broth. And then it comes out really, really nice. And then it's So like some things are like literally a proper fusion.
Yeah.
So it's like, but it's not really food that you find in other places. My favourite Libyan food, I think a lot of people don't like this. They think it sounds icky, but I love it so much. It's you basically get a mixture of, it's like spiced rice and meat, and you stuff it into the long intestine of a sheep, and then you steam it. But then it's like, it's, you know, almost like a sausage casing. It's so thin, and then you cut into it, and then it's this steamed, fluffy, like spiced rice with meat. And I think it's amazing. I think it's great. But so some people have explained it, and they're like, I am never going to eat that. Like, and they were like, if you put that in front of me, I would not eat that.
Maybe if you say that, but if you presented it to them,
Yeah,
and
they'd
they've
be
got
like,
a look and they
wow,
smell it.
Yeah, but I respect that. Obviously, like, it's just what you've grown up with. But yeah, I would say that very family orientated.
Yeah.
People love their music, like Arabic music, particularly. There's also like a really big native population in the whole of North Africa. They're called, well, internationally they're called Berbers, but that's actually from the French word for barbarian. So I don't like using that one because I don't agree with it. But you know, it's like the Bedouin people, like the native. They're usually
Could you say that again?
Bedouin.
Bedouin people.
Yeah,
Okay.
Bedouin. Yeah. So it's people that don't have like a set home. They like travel around. They like live, you know, just on the cusp before it becomes the Sahara Desert.
Right.
So they live in like quite extreme heat. They know how to navigate the desert basically.
Wow.
Yeah, and even now in contemporary times, like a lot of people that migrate from sub-Saharan Africa sometimes have to travel through the Sahara. But sometimes people, like, there'll be Bedouin people that will guide them, so you can like pay somebody, and it's like literally a 3-day walk. Like you don't sleep
Through the desert.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So then in the day it's roasting hot. At night it's absolutely freezing. But yeah, like a lot
and you walk through the day and through the night.
Yeah, you don't stop. So like, it's very, very unfortunate. People will like collapse, people will die, like things like that. But that's like a very common path taken by like sub-Saharan migrants in Africa today to like get to the coast. But yeah, it's absolutely crazy. Yeah,
Wow.
people love to gossip. I would say that's a big part of living culture. People love to gossip.
Nice. So, tell me a little bit about the things you enjoy doing.
Just in general, or in terms of like Libyan culture?
Yeah, in terms of like any culturally relevant or culturally significant things that you enjoy.
Oh yeah. Last August, my sister got married, and she was the first of our family to get married. So she's the oldest girl. She's the second oldest kid, and so it was kind of a big deal. Like she was getting married. We're like, go on, you know, big party time. And in Libya, a wedding is 7 days, and you have loads of different things that happen like before the actual wedding. And then it's quite customary to have like a huge wedding. You like invite like hundreds of people. But one of the things is doing henna. And I think a lot of people know henna. It's like become quite like a well-known thing. But in Libya, you do henna on both your hands and your feet. And so we stayed out the night before her wedding. Mum was doing a henna, and she literally had to have her hands and feet like in bags. So she had to do it. My mum had to do it on my sister's bed because she had to be able to go to sleep. So she had to be already lying down. Yeah, so then she does the henna, puts like tissue paper on it so it doesn't smudge, and then you wrap your hands in like plastic bags. And the way that she was asleep, she'd been mummified. Like she was literally like hands straight down, legs straight down, like trying not to smudge it. But that was like a really nice memory as well of like us getting that done.
And do you have to do the henna the night before?
I think it's supposed to actually be 2 days before.
Okay.
But we were like, it was like chaos because we were doing so much stuff ourselves, and like my sister and her husband, they like paid for everything themselves. So there's a lot of stuff we were doing like on a budget. You know, we were like setting up tables, we were like ironing people's, you know, clothes, everything like that. So it was very like group effort. So yeah, it was like literally, I think the wedding, they got married at like 10 a.m. and we were still doing henna at like 2 a.m. Like, so it was like a feat. Yeah.
Wow. And was that the final day of the 7 days?
So we didn't fully do the 7 days because it's so much money. It's so much money. And usually because of Libyan culture, you know, you have usually you have big families. Like my family is that I've got 5 siblings. There's 6 of us. My mum, she had like 13 siblings. I'd had like 8. You know, like it's just a huge family. Which is quite funny because it's not a very big population. It's not a very big country, but it's just quite customary to have a big family. And so you usually have a lot of people coming, you have a lot of people helping out, you have a lot of people, you know, seeing you, giving you gifts, things like that. But because we didn't really have that, it meant that we couldn't really pull off a 7-day thing. Yeah. And then usually like when it's your wedding, you like drive through between your house and when you're going to get married, and it's basically like they block off the road and everybody like drives behind you, people like honking their horns, they're like singing and everything. But yeah, it's like a bit of a disconnect, you know. You can't really get that here because it's not the culture.
Yeah, and it made me think a little bit of my culture, my Caribbean culture, and a lot of other Black cultures where community and family and that collectivism is super, super central. And how different that is to other parts of the world.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, like it's like quite customary to like you want to look really good. Like even if you're a guest, like you want to look really good because you want to show them that you've put in effort. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like even things like that is not common here. Like, you know, you go to like Libyan weddings, Arab weddings, everybody's got a full beat on, like it's like Huda beauty tutorial, like just, do you know what I mean? Like the most beautiful, like it looks like a prom dress. Like everybody's like absolutely like to the nines.
Full jewellery,
full
hair done.
Yeah, they've got half
smelling
of
nice.
smelling nice. Yeah, that's a big one as well. Yeah, probably dousing themselves in like oud perfume. So yeah,
nice. You wanted to mention a little bit about some historical books that you've read?
Definitely, yeah. So I'm a bit of a nerd. I love a nice historical book. I like the Jane Eyres, Jane Austen, things like that. And so something that I think I've been keeping up with recently, I don't know if anybody else has, but there's going to be like an adaptation of Wuthering Heights. And it reminded me of something else that happened last year. But the main male character in the Wuthering Heights is supposed to be like Black or mixed heritage, and it's like a big part of his story in the book that he is like, you know, not white, and because he lives with like an adoptive family and they don't treat him the best because he is, you know, foreigner. This book was written in the 1800s, so it's a very interesting like part of his actual character. But recently they've like just announced the casting for this new remake, and they've casted like a white person for the main character. And a lot of people are saying that it's very like interesting. It's very interesting that they've chosen to not cast somebody where the character's story is based so much on their identity, especially for an English book. I think it was Charlotte Bronte. I wrote. Yeah, or her sister. It was one of the Brontes. One of the Brontes. And it's very interesting to choose to not cast somebody where it's literally their whole story. And it also reminded me of this thing that I saw, and it was about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than that. But there was this painting that they uncovered in the National Gallery in London, and they had chemically scanned it to sort of try and date it or age it or find any information about it. And then when they scanned it, they realised that during one of the restorations, one of the characters in the painting had been painted over, and the painting was of, I think it was 3 children. It was a duke's children, and he'd commissioned this painting, and the figure that had been painted over was this mixed race child, or like Black child, you know, depends sort of how you see it. And it became such an interesting point, and it was such an interesting thing for them to have discovered, because they looked through historical records and they found out this child had been claimed by his dad, who was the Duke, and he was a white man. And so I think it was between the 16 and 1800s, they had dated this painting too. And so it was very interesting to find that it was like these 3 very upstanding like white children, and then their like half brother who was also in the painting, and he was wearing clothes that would have only been available to children of royalty. You know, they found records to say that he'd been accepted, he'd been like legitimized. So he was seen as one of the Duke's children, he was seen as like a legitimate heir. He would have had the education, he would have had money, he would have had anything else that anybody would have had. But at some point in the line, he's painted out of this painting, which is so crazy to see, because you think, you know, how many other people have been painted out, especially, you know, this child is incredibly wealthy, like literally royalty in England, you know, one of the richest and still strongest countries in the world. And so just two things like interact in your brain, they like remind you of certain things. And then I think it's just interesting to hold in your mind, you know, people from all different heritages have always been in lots of different places. And I feel like in contemporary times, when we talk about, you know, like integration, or like, you know, even people talk about like colourblind casting in films, it's like, well, you don't even know who could have been a mixed heritage or Black or anything like that.
Yeah. So this painting was, when did you say the painting was? Between the 1600s and the 1800s?
Yeah, at some point then.
And this mixed race boys, or this black boys' legacy and his history had been erased there. And we fast forward all the way into this film, the readaptation of this film, and it's still this mixed race character is being erased.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Really interesting. Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Voice, Your Story. This podcast was produced by the marketing team. Stay tuned for part 2, where Mawda tells us more about her heritage and further episodes showcasing the experiences and cultures of Black staff members and people we support.